Hi, you're watching Middle East with Nazca Zada. Our guest today is Ian Rogers, Save the Children International Country Director in Lebanon. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
It's such a pleasure having you. Before we get into politics, refugees, and functions of your organization, Save the Children, talk to us a little about yourself.
So I've been working in the humanitarian aid sector for approximately about 20 to 23 years, and have worked for other agencies beyond Save the Children, including Médecins Sans Frontières, the Red Cross, and worked in multiple different conflict settings as well as natural disasters.
Fantastic. And I know you were in Haiti and many other conflict zones. I was watching you, following you online.
That's right, yes. So I have been in both natural disasters, which are large-scale natural disasters such as Haiti or the China earthquakes, as well as different types of conflicts, including Sri Lanka, working on the Chechen conflict back a fair while ago, as well as the Bosnian conflict.
And how long have you been in Lebanon?
So I've been in Lebanon now for approximately 18 months. 18
months. That's good. Also, let's talk about Save the Children. Save the Children has many projects in the Middle East, not just for children and families. In my understanding, for so many years, I just thought they deal with children. Please share some of your projects of your organization with us.
Sure. So Save the Children, as you say, has been in the Middle East for a considerably long time. In Lebanon itself, it started in 1953. The projects that we do today obviously are more centered on the Syrian conflict. So they include child protection programs, which look at working with street children, children who are actually having to work, so child labor programs to try and prevent that. Education programs, as well as shelter programs for their families, and cash assistance programming as well.
Yes, and we're going to get into some of the projects you talked about, which is you've been working closely with those children. Working in the field in Lebanon, how many refugees do you deal with in the country right now? If you can tell us. It's hard to, because I know some of them not registered.
Yeah, so of course, at the moment, the official figure is approximately 1.1 million refugees which are registered. The number or the estimate of refugees that may be in country could be as high as 1.5 million refugees from Syria. That is also on top of the fact that Lebanon has had refugees for quite some time, for over 40 years. Palestinian refugees are here, and as well as Iraqi refugees. So I believe that the approximate total refugee population in Lebanon is about almost would exceed 45% of the entire population of Lebanon, which is a significant impact on both the hardships for refugees, but also for the population of Lebanon themselves.
Yes. Do we know what percentage of those refugees children? Is it possible to know?
So approximately you would estimate that within the school age, we're saying that there's probably approximately school age children, so let's say 5 to 17, there is probably about, of the Syrian refugees, about 400,000 refugees. So looking at children under 5 years old and adding that figure together, we're at least seeing probably close to 500,000 to 600,000 of those Syrian refugees would be children.
And most of those children, obviously, are they going to school? What's going on? Or are they just living in the refugee camps?
Yeah, well, there's officially no refugee camps in Lebanon. There are either informal settlements or people are living in buildings, so they're either paying rent or there is what's referred to as substandard buildings. So some of those could be, for example, the conversion of storage lots, for example, or buildings that were not completed but people were able to move in, squat in, and then we try to upgrade those buildings so that they actually meet some form of standard. So people live in very different sort of situations.
Is there a reason there's no refugee camps in Lebanon? I don't know.
It is political. One of the reasons is that due to the fact that there is Palestinian refugees in Lebanon and have been for over 40 years now, the Lebanese government is quite cautious about the establishment of formal camps because they are concerned that the refugees may not return. That isn't the case. Refugees do wish to return. They don't wish to permanently settle in Lebanon. Obviously, at the moment, they are just seeking asylum because it's unsafe to be inside Syria.
Then there's Syrians, obviously, and Palestinians and Iraqis. Is there other refugees, like from Africa or somewhere else, going to Lebanon?
No, you don't see too many. There might be some minor refugees from other locations, but they're the three main groups that make up sort of the population, as I say, which makes up 45% of the entire population of Lebanon.
That's a lot of people in Lebanon. And Lebanon is not a rich country because it's just still recovering from a civil war, as you know.
Well, what you do see is significant inequity in the country. So whilst there are a small population of well-to-do Lebanese, you also have poor Lebanese or Lebanese families that are in poverty. And Save the Children also doesn't distinguish. When Save the Children works in the country, it is working for children at risk or children who need assistance. So regardless if they are either Syrian, Iraqi, Palestinian or Lebanese, our programs try and address all of those. The other reason to do so, of course, apart from the right and the need, is also for social cohesion reasons. When you have a population who is receiving something and another population isn't, then you're likely to do harm by creating conflict.
We're going to get into meeting basic needs for those refugees, but how do you Save the Children cannot help all those refugees or people in need? How do you guys pick and choose which refugees or Lebanese or Palestinians, how you decide to help those first?
It's a good question, and as you rightly say, we are not meeting the needs of all children. We would like to. It is a mission statement of Save the Children. There are other NGOs who are working inside Lebanon that are also trying to address those needs, and you also have UN bodies such as UNICEF trying to do that, yet still all the needs of the refugees and the children are not being met. So in order to be able to do that, you do have to undertake a vulnerability study. So taking a look at who is most vulnerable. So is that a person who is not living in a permanent shelter? Children who have to work because their parents are not allowed to work. So there are a set of criteria that we look at placing them on a vulnerability index. And basically we try and work from the lowest point upwards. And that is done basically until we run out of funds. So we have funding from both institutional donors such as the US government or through other foreign governments, as well as individuals. And we basically work to a point and start from the bottom of that vulnerability list and then and try and meet as many of those children's needs as possible.
Yes, and you mentioned it's almost impossible to meet all the needs. Do you work closely with the other organizations?
So we do work with all organizations, all international organizations. There is a coordinating body in which we turn around and work. We geographically divide up the country so that we are not all on top of each other, so to speak, and making sure that those needs are being met. There's also a large UN coordinating mechanism as well as a government coordinating mechanism, and those three bodies get together and they turn around and they try and agree on a vulnerability criteria. They ensure that, for example, say the children are going to work on education and child protection. You might have another organisation such as Age Help, who turn around and work with the elderly. Or you might have Handicap International, who is working with children with disabilities. So all of those types of social services and needs are divided up amongst multiple different agencies, and we try and make sure that we are doing that in a coordinated and collaborative fashion.
And the role of Lebanese government do they help? Or obviously, if you are in the country, you have to work with them and get all these permissions and registrations, things that Save the Children need.
Yeah, so obviously we do work in coordination and collaboration with the Lebanese government. We are lucky as an agency because I believe that we're probably one of the oldest agencies having worked in Lebanon and worked all the way through, as you mentioned previously, the civil war that was in Lebanon. So this has given us a set of credibility and reputation with the government that allows us to have the permissions, have the access to turn around and undertake the work that's needed. And so the Lebanese government is doing as much as it can. I mean, I can only stress to your viewers, whatever home country they're in, could you imagine having 45% of the population being refugees?
It's really, when I was reading about that, I thought about, I'm like, wow, not many media agencies talking about it. This is a lot of people, and then many people without jobs. So you tell us about that. You live there in Lebanon, like you said.
Certainly. Well, even before the crisis, Lebanon had approximately, for youth unemployment, it would have been up around 30%. So there wasn't enough jobs for young people. And the type of industries that are in Lebanon don't lend themselves particularly well to too much unskilled labour or opportunities to work in a field of sort of large-scale employees. So whilst there is an agricultural industry here, it's quite small. Lebanon, it is quite small as a country. So it only takes, so it would only take 3 hours to drive from north to south. So it is quite a small country. At any one time, we are our programs, for example, our offices in the north aren't any further than 5 kilometres from the Syrian border itself. So it is a very small country. So the kind of jobs that are needed just aren't really available in Lebanon. So that makes a large problem because you've got a population and imagine an influx again of 1.2 million of the official figure of people who are now needing a job, or at least when we look at that, that's actually an influx of, if you're aiming to have one wage earner in a household, you're talking approximately 300,000 people who need a job and in order to survive. Minimum food basket here is probably considered about $450 per family per month to turn around and survive. The World Food Programme gives money so that people can turn around and buy goods at certain shops through their program. And then there is cash assistance programming, $175, which Save the Children leads on a consortium with multiple NGOs so that we can turn around, and NGOs such as CARE and Mercy Corps, who we turn around and we work with those organisations in order to turn around and get the maximum coverage across the country. But when you take the approximately, let's say $125 from World Food Programme, $175 from our program, that is only adding up to $300 or a little bit more they're still short of $150. So somebody has to go out and try and earn wages somehow. One of the biggest problems that we face is that children therefore go out and work, because children can more easily gain employment, especially if the parents are not allowed to work because it's against the current policy. Then children can kind of slip through the system and take up jobs. And if they take up jobs, apart from it being harmful to the child itself, it also denies them an education. And the trouble
I think we can do a show on child labor, obviously, in the Middle East, which is, it's going on not just in the Middle East, around the globe.
And what you actually are going to face is that these children are then denied their potential by not being able to get an education. And that's going to have long-term effects for any of the recovery and reconstruction of Syria once peace breaks out inside Syria, because you're going to have a population that doesn't have the required education to try and reconstruct the country and make it prosper after a war. So what we do face is the real risk of what we're referring to as a lost generation. That is a generation of children who don't receive an education that's needed.
And then that generation of kids, they're going to miss out of education, then their kids going to be affected. So the cycle of the whole, it's the violence and the crisis will continue for a while.
Yes, no, you're 100% correct. It isn't just the immediate conflict that has an impact, which does have a very drastic effect on individuals. There is the long-term investment effects that occur, and we've seen that in other conflicts, that it actually takes multiple generations to actually get over that and turn around and prosper. In a country that was highly sophisticated, had extremely good health services, such as Syria, we've got to consider just not only the individual loss, but the economic loss, that the children who will be going back to Syria when peace does break out will be returning to a country that has been sent back 30 years. So instead of them being able to prosper in a modern country, they're going to have to be picking up the pieces. So that in itself is just such a tragic situation.
Yes, I have to ask you about, I know you are not a politician, but I need, because you've been living in the Middle East for a while. Is there any hope for Syrian crisis? I know you don't have to give me an answer. I'm just wondering, because, if you live there, you see the situation. What do you think of that?
I mean, obviously, I believe there is hope to solve this situation. I think the question we've got to ask is what more can be done, and when is the UN system going to be allowed to work? When is the Security Council going to be able to do its job? And at the moment, we see that is being blocked. Finding some kind of peace and reconciliation process is going to be necessary. Peace is not just going to be people putting down their guns and no longer fighting. It is going to require some kind of reconciliation process. Now, that can start now. That can be, we have 1.2 million people, for example, in Lebanon. There is over 2 million people in Turkey, and there's just under 1 million people in Jordan. If we start working with these refugees now on reconciliation programming, then we can turn around and ensure that they have the skill set and the empowerment and the desire to try and bring peace forward. What the solution
Rogers,
is now.
I want to, before we running out of time, but there's two important topics I really want to discuss it with you, which is, you recently worked on a project which told stories of children living and working on the streets of Lebanon. Can you tell us about that? And the story was told by the children themselves. If
That's
you can
right.
shortly.
The program there was obviously there have been a number of stories done with the media on the issues that street children face. But what we decided to do was, because of understanding that compassion fatigue that builds up when people at home have images on their television screens that are just repeated. And so we wanted to take a look at a program where the children themselves could tell their story, design the sets. So we got in a photographer who worked with the children, allowed them to participate, tell their story, and then actually use their imagination and design the sets in a way that empowered them to be able to tell the story. It wasn't just sadness and tragedy, it was creativity. Now, of course, the topic is very, very sad. There was a set of photos on street children. There was a set of photos on a loss of education, a set of photos of fear of their future being taken away, and safety and security. So these were set designs and photos that were done after consultation with children and actually having the children work on the sets themselves. And it was just a different way to try and communicate the message that it isn't good enough that the world sits by while an entire country is being devastated and that all the social systems are deteriorating, because not only are there refugees in Lebanon, we still have a large population in Syria who are under extreme stress.
Yes. The type of work you do in refugee camps and around refugees in Lebanon, I'm sure it's challenging and stressful as well. How do you cope with it?
For me, obviously, as the head of the organization, we have in Lebanon 390 staff. The most important people and the people who are under stress are actually the staff who are at the sharp end or the coalface. They deal with the children, they deal with these families every single day. Those staff who are Lebanese, Palestinian and Syrian, they, to me, are really the people who are making the difference in the lives of these refugees. It's them who truly have the compassion. They are the ones that are working so hard, tirelessly. We have only, I believe 7 expatriates in country. The rest of our staff, 390 of them, are from the community here, and they are working very long hours and are very dedicated to the work that we do.
We talked about the humanitarian agencies like Save the Children, UN, they're all helping and then unable to meet the basic needs of millions of people because of the growing refugees, like you mentioned earlier. Because of the crisis in the Middle East, there's Iraq, there's Syria and Lebanon. Before all of those refugees, they were dealing with their own economic crisis. Do you think because of what needs to be done? I was watching an interview with you with CNN a while ago, like many years ago, a couple years ago, and you were saying there's not enough being done. What do you say if you were asked the same question? Has enough been done in case of like refugees?
No, I think the number one thing is we can't ever do enough. Until the population is in a situation where children are prospering, they have an opportunity, their parents actually have an opportunity to look after their children, to have that moment and of dignity, and it's such an important thing, is to ensure that mothers and fathers can look after their children and create an enabling environment. I think that until that moment happens, we've just got to keep working, and we've got to keep getting as much funding as possible, and just not stop, because the population here is under such stress.
And I was also, I really don't want to talk about that because you mentioned about how the economic crisis in Lebanon before refugees was hard. And then you have all those refugees going to the country. I was reading about how the tension between Lebanese refugees, between refugees from different countries is really, it's rising. What do you say about that? What's going on there?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, at any time when you have additional pressures that can be brought in by having other people or an increased number of people in need, that's going to cause stress and tension within the community. I have to say that the Lebanese community, as well as the Palestinian communities here, who, as I said, have been refugees here for a very long time, they're being extraordinarily tolerant and trying to do the best that they can, and they very much are welcoming and accepting the new refugees in. So I think that everybody is doing very well, and I would pose that to, as I say, to your listeners, imagine that you got another 100 million people entering into the United States, how much tension that might cause, and whether or not that wouldn't break out into some form of conflict. And yet, here in Lebanon, it doesn't.
You saw in the United States, there was talk about 10,000 refugees. It was disaster, and everybody was freaking out. So I don't know how they do it there. It's amazing the way they deal with it. When you talk to them, what do average refugees they say? Do they have hope to go somewhere, or they feel like they're stuck?
Well, I think the number one thing is that we hear from refugees is they want the conflict over and they want to return to Syria.
Ian Rogers, Save the Children International Country Director in Lebanon, thank you for joining us. And thank you for watching, everyone. And I'll see you next time. Take care.